actually, the story began a little before that, which was I wanted to compare what our teams on the ground were finding regarding deforestation. And I said, I don't have a lot of confidence that teams on the ground can do a very good job of identifying deforestation. I think they can do a good job of looking for banned pesticides, looking at labor issues, but deforestation, maybe it just happened over the next hill and you just didn't go there. So I asked the team, could you look at the systems that exist for the, I said, what is the system behind every news article I read about how many hectares have been deforested? Go and find that system and let's at least match our system with theirs, and let's make sure that we're in the same ballpark.
Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and I am joined by David Browning from Enveritas. And we today are going to be adding on top of this theme that we're exploring about intentional problem solving. And one of those intentional problems that needs to be solved is how people get to understand the new EU regulations with regards to deforestation detection. David, how do people actually get their heads around what all of this means for them? Because a lot of people are very confused by what these new EU laws mean.
So there's, I guess, to make it fairly, to try and boil it down to simple terms, if the coffee is going to come into the EU, it has to be deforestation-free. And if the coffee comes in and then leaves and goes out again, it also has to be deforestation-free. So for any of you who are receiving coffee in some form and then bring it in from Europe, that's also part of this process. I would also say I've in a lot of conversations, and I think this type of regulation is likely to happen in other places as well. I'd imagine that we'll end up at some point seeing regulations like this in North America.
Just to clarify, is this just for green coffee or is it for green and roasted coffee?
If the coffee is exported out of Europe as roasted, then yes, it has to also comply. So if coffee is leaving, then it has to comply. There's 3 articles in the regulation to read. There's an Article 9, Article 10, Article 11. Don't worry reading Article 11, but it's Article 9 and 10 that are the only 2 that matter. But in very simple terms, if there's any deforested coffee in your coffee, then the law says you can't bring it in. That is very challenging because most of the world's coffee is in very fragmented supply chains. It doesn't come in very. I also should mention that this regulation is not specifically tailored to coffee. It actually covers 7 commodities. So I hear a lot of people who are quite frustrated that there wasn't more nuance in the regulation that would take account of coffee, but coffee was just 1/7 of everything that they were dealing with, and it's fully understandable why the EU did what it did. They're concerned about climate change, concerned about deforestation. They didn't feel like they wanted to have to be contributing to that problem. But of course, once you get to an industry like coffee, it becomes incredibly complicated to understand the next steps, because there are 12.5 million coffee farmers out there. A lot of this coffee, when it changes hands, it doesn't change hands through nice, neat, formal Excel spreadsheets or apps. These are transactions where there's no pen and paper, there's no receipt.
Handshake.
Coffee gets mixed and passed from farmer to small agent to medium agent to large agent to exporter to importer. So that being said, when the regulation first came out, we had a look at the regulation, and we were getting a lot of questions from our clients, and we realized that the team, the Enveritas team, sort of went away to have a look at, well, how would we actually comply? Actually, the story began a little before that, which was I wanted to compare what our teams on the ground were finding regarding deforestation. And I said, I don't have a lot of confidence that teams on the ground can do a very good job of identifying deforestation. I think they can do a good job of looking for banned pesticides, looking at labor issues, but deforestation, maybe it just happened over the next hill and you just didn't go there. So I asked the team, could you look at the system that exists for the, I said, what is the system behind every news article I read about how many hectares have been deforested? Go and find that system, and let's at least match our system with theirs, and let's make sure that we're in the same ballpark.
Folks, our first on-demand workshop, How to Become a Coffee Consultant, is now available for you to learn at your own pace for just €50, and it comes with a certificate upon completion. Go to mapitforward.coffee/workshops or click the link in the show notes for more details. Support this podcast by supporting our sponsors.
Just to give me some confidence that we've got it. So they went away and they came back within 48 hours and said it's not really worth doing because the system is completely broken and it doesn't really measure deforestation accurately. And I said, okay, why is that? I said, well, it's using 30-meter resolution, and the resolution is so non-granular that it can't really tell what is forest and what is the commercial crop. And so all the palm, all the rubber trees are all just being called trees. They're not actually measuring forest, they're measuring trees. And whenever a commercial plantation is cut down, which is not deforestation, that gets counted as deforestation. So there's enormous,
so even stumping
of commercial palm oil plantations gets called deforestation incorrectly. And so I said, well, could you build about a model? And they said, sure, and off they went. And they came back with his model, which is just generations ahead. So we had the great advantage that again, it was a perfect task for neural networks. It's incredibly vast. The challenge at hand. You have to get to more granular satellite imagery, so you have to get down to 50 centimeters. So that means every pixel you're looking at is about this big. So it's about 50 by 50 centimeters.
Wow.
When you get to that level, you can tell the difference between a palm oil tree and a forest. And more importantly, if something is deforested, you can tell what crop was planted there. And that's what you need the 50 centimeter imagery for. The 10 meter, which is what the EU would like everyone to use, is just not granular enough. So you can't actually tell what is coffee. So we said, well, we're going to have to go to the more granular. But there's good reason why no one else wants to do that, because the data complexity is off the charts. And so we finished Vietnam. So if you want to ask me how many cafeteria trays, because each pixel is about the size of a cafeteria tray. You ask me how many cafeteria trays would there be if I laid them end to end on every piece of dirt in Vietnam? The answer is 1.34 trillion pixels, or 2.4 trillion coffee trays. And you might say, yeah, okay, so that's a lot of trays. And you say, but I know big numbers. It's trillions, and there's trillions and billions, and they're all big. But trillions truly are an incomprehensible. If I ask how many million seconds ago, I think it's like 2 weeks ago. Now, if I ask how many is a billion seconds ago, you might think, well, that's probably, I don't know, January. Maybe it was during COVID, but a billion seconds ago it's like the fall of the Berlin Wall. And they say, well, if that's the fall of the Berlin Wall, then a trillion seconds ago, well, that's more. So trillion's more than a billion. So I guess that must be like World War II, or maybe the War of Independence, something like that. But no, a trillion seconds is before Washington, before Columbus, before the Romans, before the pyramids, before the end of the last ice age. It's 34,000 years ago.
Wow.
So magnitude that we're dealing with, that like what is actually asked. So the regulation says, ask what seems like a fairly straightforward thing, which is just go and make sure you understand where the deforestation is, and make sure that the forest has been taken away from, and you also then you need to make sure that there's no coffee growing on that piece of deforestation. So basically, you just need two simple things, which is just, well, three, I guess. You need to know where the forests are, you need to know when the forest disappeared, and you need to know if coffee got put in that place. But it turns out that those three things require 1.34 trillion pixels in Vietnam. But of course, Vietnam's a small country, so then we had to move to Brazil, and Brazil is 26 the size of Vietnam.
26 times the size?
So Brazil is the size of Europe. It's basically the size of Western Europe. So, which is part of the reason why, as I mentioned in the earlier podcast, the team has traveled 150,000 kilometers just in Brazil. So so the team managed to resolve a lot of the false positives. We actually redid Sumatra, because we could see on the maps that Sumatra was getting hammered as being a really gross deforesting nation. And that had actually flowed through to those various significant coffee retailers who had said, we will not buy coffee from Sumatra.
Yeah.
Because the numbers show that it is doing such a poor job of protecting its forests. But what we found is that the deforestation was overestimated by a factor of 4. So it was actually only 25% the deforestation that had been thought, and most of the rest was rubber and palm oil plantation. So just commercial farms replanting their trees every 10 or 15 years. But that's not deforestation. That's not a forest that's been cut down. It's just agriculture. So that was the starting point. Was can we actually build an accurate system? And the answer is yes. And so we're now moving across the world and building the only system which can detect deforestation accurately, and then say if coffee was planted there. The next step is then to actually build the system whereby you do something about that. And that is literally what we're in the process of now, and starting to talk to governments and helping them understand how can we work out a system where we can assure that coffee isn't being planted illegally, so that your exports can't get inhibited. Because the math is that if you start to try and build units for large roasters, if you start to try and build a supply unit to supply the roasters, you very quickly discover that the intent was that you'd create a small group of farmers who are doing the right thing. So Vietnam has about 600,000 farmers. So I think the intent of the regulation is, well, your job is to go out and find 20,000, 30,000 of those farmers and make sure that they're doing the right thing, and then you can buy from those farmers and you can bring it to Europe. But when you actually do the math, what you discover fairly quickly is the large companies are buying from like 200,000 farmers. So just 2 or 3 of the major roasters are accounting for all the farmers. And since the traders will have to build these systems, you actually will have to build a system for all of the farmers. So at that point, the logic starts to break down. If I need all 600,000 farmers in my group that I say are deforestation free, then what I'm really saying is I just need to
for the whole country.
That's sort of an epiphany that's we've really only come across in the last probably 2 or 3 weeks. But it has implications for now. How do you actually design something which can meet the aspirations of the EU, but can do the right thing by farmers and governments? But we're excited. We think we have answers, and but essentially will come down to being able to identify the specific deforestation that's happening, and then working out how to make sure that is remediated. For all of your listeners who are standing by, I would say that if we can get agreement, if we can get the EU to align with how we propose to address the issue, then Enveritas will have the answer for all of the world's exporters. They'll be able to log into the system. We will actually address all of the deforestation, and they'll be able to get a deforestation certificate. It is not a slam dunk. It does require the EU will want to lay out for them, here's how we're proposing to address this. But certainly the first part of the process to actually know how much deforestation is happening, where it's happening, and that piece we've solved. Now comes the next step, which is what you do about that.
And that was going to be my next question: is how do you roll this out? Does it become a product where people have to? Does it get funded by governments? Does it get funded by subscription services from producers, or is it the roasters that are going to pay for it? How does this product get rolled out?
Yeah, so it would be built at a large roaster level. The roaster could just pay Enveritas directly, but once you get down to the vast majority of exporters, then the exporters would be able to log in. They'd be able to get certification they need.
Right, you pay for the certificate, the certification. Yeah,
and it's I think it's about $10 a ton, or about 0.5 cent a pound, or something like that. So
that's super reasonable.
it's certainly it's cheaper than what's out there, but again, that's because we can do that much lower because this was a problem which stumbled into the Enveritas ecosystem, which has been already tailor-made to solve one of this sort of problem, meaning we had a machine learning team who were doing other things, but they were very well equipped to solve this problem. But just having machine learning isn't enough. The way machine learning works is you have to do feedback loops. You have to tell it when it's wrong. That is very challenging because for something like coffee, you can't do it once. So Google and Microsoft have both built a deforestation model, but the Enveritas one is considerably more accurate. But that's because they've built a model, but it's not their business. They're not going to go off and tromp around in the forests of the tropics. But that's exactly what we do. So our teams are out there in very forbidding terrain in 26 countries, and they're giving feedback back to the model of whether it's accurate or not. How we're doing for time, I can give one example of what that looks like.
Go ahead.
Probably. So maybe another example might help people understand about why you need that ground truth and why it's just not enough to have a smart person in a university who can build models. There's no question. There's lots of people out there who can build good machine learning models, but you have to add to that this very, very labor-intensive work on the ground. When we entered Cote d'Ivoire a few years ago, I met with the First Lady, and we wanted to build a long-term partnership. So one of my questions was, what are the issues that are of great concern for you and the country? And she said one of them is our education system. That's really important for the future of Cote d'Ivoire. I want to understand our schools and where they are, and how we can invest in them. But we don't actually have a repository. We don't really have a credible system of where all our schools are. So would you be able to do that? And I said, that's actually that's a task that's well suited to machine learning, because a school in Cote d'Ivoire looks totally different than anything else. It's a longer building than a normal house. It'll most often have a toilet block, and it'll have a whole patch of dirt out the front where the kids play soccer, and so that's really different than a church. A church is more of a square shape. It also has a lot of paths leading into it and beaten, but just a different sort of solution. So we could task the machine learning to find the schools, and they found 11,000 schools in a matter of weeks. So we're able to identify the latitude, longitude of all the schools in the country very quickly. But it did make some mistakes. And it made two mistakes primarily, which I think is illuminating to understand. It is hard to get your head around what machine learning does and what it doesn't do, and it doesn't think the way a human would look at a problem. The first mistake it made was commercial chicken coops. So there was one other building that was long and thin, and that was chicken coops. So it made errors there. It kept on picking up chicken coops and saying this is a school. But the other error, we had to feed back in the model, no, that's not a school, that's a chicken coop, and eventually it gets better. But the other mistake it made was rapids in rivers. You might think, well, rapids in a river look nothing like a school, but the rapids in the river are silver, where the waves are getting kicked up, so it looks a lot like a tin roof, and it's a rectangle, because it has two banks of the river on these two sides, and it has still water above it and still water below it, and there's basically this rectangle of silver. And so machine learning says that looks like a school. That's sort of, you told me what a school looked like. This looks like a school. So you're going to have to feed that back in and say, no, that's not a school, that's a river. And then the model goes, oh, okay. And then over time it learns. But that's why you need actually, those are very easy cases. Once you get down to the very nuanced case of, is this a coffee plantation, or is it a forest, or is it a coffee plantation with pepper grown amongst it, or is it a rubber plantation with rows of coffee planted in between it, or is it a coffee plantation that was abandoned but planted at a very different density, all those sorts of variations. That to get accurate, you actually need to keep feeding that in and then find your errors and go back. So it was, it was interesting that it was not a problem that we really designed Enveritas to handle. But when the EU regulation came along, we realized we were just very well positioned. We had, we had hundreds of people, very dedicated, very care a great deal about quality control. They're going out, and some of the photographs they come back with are extraordinary to watch. There's a team with a bamboo, like a 15-foot bamboo pole, and they've strapped their phone on the bamboo pole, and they're holding it up to try and get Wi-Fi reception to the train.
To send data or receive data. I love it.
One of our team texted back one day, can I come? I haven't got to the point that you wanted me to go to, but can I come home? There's a tiger stalking me. And we said, yes.
Oh my God.
Come home.
There's only one answer to that is yes. The other thing that I, from all the research that I did preparing for this series, the one thing that I also can see that the Enveritas team is dedicated to is data integrity, which is incredibly refreshing. It's not just that you want to be the first to solve a problem. It's that you want to understand the underpinning quality of the data behind it and then fix that problem before you end up fixing the overall problem. And as someone who's trained as a scientist, I have a lot of respect for that approach to problem solving, because we in an industry are going off a lot of marketing data rather than actual real data. And I have a lot of appreciation for the way that you and your team approach fixing problems with good real data that you've collected that you can verify and then go ahead and solve the problems. It's really refreshing.
It's one of the problems that comes with the industry that, again, because it's so fragmented, it is incredibly difficult. Historically, it's been incredibly difficult to really data at scale. So it's understandable that in the end people lean on anecdotes or small samples or whatever. But that was what we set out to solve.
So we have one episode left in this series, sadly, and this is about regenerative agriculture. So join us for that episode, folks, and we'll see you soon. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in, friends. There are 2 ways you can support this podcast. Firstly, become a paid member of our YouTube channel. Secondly, you can join our Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video before you leave, and check the show notes for more information. Now, this is what you should check out next.